Hey everyone, very excited to bring you episode 18 of Audiolog's podcast. This time we spoke with the audio team on Saros, an absolutely amazing sounding game from Housemarque. It was really interesting to hear how each team member brought their unique skills to this title. We cover a lot of topics such as sound identity, their thoughtful approach to haptics, 3D audio, and we dive into ambiences, weapons, cinematics, bosses, and of course controlling all that chaos in the mix. This was a very stacked interview, so I hope you enjoy it. Welcome to the podcast, the team of Saros, or is it Saros? Saros? I feel like I've been saying it so many different ways.
Saros, I think.
Saros? Okay.
Yeah.
The I think makes me question it.
Yeah, I guess it depends on the accent, I suppose. So, but Saros is how we've been.
Yeah, okay. I like it. Okay, so anything goes, but I'll try to say Saros. Welcome. The game has been so much fun to play. I'm addicted, and currently I'm just losing to this one boss that I can only describe it as a phoenix. I think it's the last boss. I hope.
I
think it's the
second
one.
Oh, there's some prizes around the corner. Okay. But yeah, a game that's really hard to put down. So, congrats to you all for making such a great game. It sounds amazing. So we're super happy to have you here and chat about this. And we have a lot of people here. This is a big call. Usually we only have one or two people. So it's fun to get perspectives from a lot of different people on the studio. So with that, I guess we can just sort of get to know individually who you are. You could just say your title, what you're doing on the project, how long you've been on the project, whatever you feel comfortable with. The first person I see here is Pete. So how about, go for it, Pete.
Yeah, of course. Thank you. Thanks for having us. So I've been at Sony now for 5 years. I think I was on Saros for just about a year. All in all, my journey into game audio wasn't exactly a straightforward one. I came from the live theatre. It was when I was there, I realised I could get a career in game audio. So started off at Supermassive Games and then joined Sony. I did a little work on Returnal, and then but last year I've been working on Saros. I was looking after UI, collectibles, and haptics as well.
Right. Cool. The UI sounds amazing, so happy to dive into that. Juuso. That is how you pronounce your name. It's Juuso?
Yeah,
okay.
Pretty much. Well, okay, or at least kind of like the English version of it.
Yeah, okay.
I can drop the Finnish bomb here as well.
I'd love to hear it, yeah.
Juuso Tolonen. So it's not that different, but there are nuances that, I think it's just easier to say you, so basically. I've been at Sony coming up to 4 years now. And I guess in general, like Saros was a bit of a kind of like a, I don't know what it's called, full circle moment, because I kind of got my real big first gig at like a AAA production with Returnal. So at the very, very end of Returnal, Jeremy Corbett was working on it and he needed some extra help. And we just met up at this kind of Finnish game audio professional meetup thing. I was still back in Finland back then, and he was looking for somebody who knew Unreal. And obviously at that point, maybe I've opened it twice. So I was like, yeah, I know it. And, I signed up for it. And yeah, it was lucky enough to work on Returnal for like months or so at the very end to kind of help out. And ever since, it's been kind of like, oh man, I wish there was another one and I could work on that. So yeah, it's been very, very lucky to be here at this time. And
nice.
Yeah, it was great.
Cool. Sounds like a dream project for you then.
For sure.
Yeah. All right, moving on to Lewis. We have two of them.
We just say Lewis and we'll see who picks it up.
You can't do that to us. We have that discussion in the office a lot, and we sit next to each other. So it's
right. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, you're the first one to talk, so.
Okay, I'm sorry, Bunzi. Yeah, so I'm one of the Lewises. There's actually 3 in our team, so you've got 60% of us basically, or 66% of us. So yeah, I'm the senior sound designer of the team. I've been here for nearly 8 years now. It's actually where I got my first gig in the game audio industry. I came straight from uni. I got lucky enough to join the team straight away. But yeah, so I did work on Returnal as well. So I was the environments lead for it, which was really great fun. And then what was brilliant about that was that when we started working on Saros, not to sort of any spoilers for Barnsley, but when Barnsley took over environments, it was a really nice sort of transition that we had where I could, hand over some stuff in early development, just be on hand basically to let Barnsley really run with it, which was cool. But yeah, I was on Saros right from the beginning, really, right from early in development. So during sort of vertical slice, I was kind of looking after a lot of different pillars, just covering many hats, so to speak. But then, yeah, once we started sort of designating pillars out and that kind of thing, I took on the weapons pillar, which was really fun. And then later on in development, I started looking after the player pillar as well, which was also really good fun.
Great. It's nice to switch pillars mid-production. Gives you a bit of a little restart and maybe a little fresh perspective.
Yeah, absolutely. It was quite fun because I was still looking after weapons whilst I was doing player stuff as well. But it was weird going from incredibly loud gunshots all day, every day, to then suddenly reviewing Foley. And I was like, this is it's nice. It gave my ears a bit of a fresh perspective, which was good. But yeah.
Yeah.
Some rest for the ears too.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
All right. So you did spoil it a bit, but Lewis B, sounds like you were doing ambiences on the project, environmental.
That's right. Yeah.
Right.
So yeah, to make it easier, everyone calls me Barnsley, and we call Everest.
Okay.
Otherwise, it gets very confusing. But yeah, I followed a similar trajectory to Everest. I came out of uni into the Sony team and started on Returnal, which was a crazy imposter syndrome. But the team looked after me, and it's been nearly 6 years now. So. It's really cool to go from cinematics on Returnal to environment here with Saros.
Cool, yeah, switching it up. Sounds great. And then Fabio, how are you doing?
I'm doing well, thanks. My name is Fabio Liutina. I actually have another surname, like a longer one, but I don't think anyone actually cares because Italian.
Oh, we care.
Want to go bigger?
Yeah, we do.
Oh, it's actually Liutina Marroni. So, but I just go with Liutina because it's easier in the UK, I'm a senior sound designer and I've been here for 5 years more or less. I was hired just after university, so it's my first gig. And in Saros I've been the enemies, bosses and projectiles lead.
Okay.
I didn't work at Returnal. I work only on the DLC. Doing this and that, more or less.
Nice. Yeah, that's a heavy pillar to be working in with a game like this. Lots of enemies, lots of bosses, lots of craziness happening at the same time. Cool, good to have you. And of course, last but most certainly not least, Loïc.
Hello. Yeah.
Nice to see you again.
Yeah, thanks for having us. Yeah, cheers. And yes, I am Loïc Couthier. I am the sound supervisor in our team, Creative Arts, at PlayStation. And so I was also leading the sound for Returnal as supervisor in our team, and then happened to be also leading the sound for Saros. So what that means is essentially reviewing a lot of planning actually was done by all the pillar owners, and we don't have all the pillar owners here, but we have quite a few. But yeah, supervisor means setting the audio direction, setting some standards for the team to be able to implement in some common baselines, I guess. And yeah, reviewing the content a lot and mixing. So that was... And then it's good to mention that they are not here today, but we have a music team, we have a dialogue team as well, and of course production team, QA team. So, we had a lot of people helping out.
Yeah.
And regarding how long I've been at PlayStation, it's been 12 years now. And I guess 15 years that I've been in the industry. And I guess I don't need to go through the whole story. It's probably fine to just say how old I am.
Yeah, great.
On that note, because you brought up that there were other pillar owners that weren't here and all that stuff, how big was the team ballpark, just in terms of audio centric on that on Saros?
Yeah, so that changed through our production of the project. As in a way that's kind of normal, as every project would do. But we started, it was just me, Barnsey, Everest, and Fabio. So at the very beginning, it was just me for a couple months. And then after these three joined me, and then after I think Juuso joined, then can't remember, I think after it was a new wave of pillar leads. We had Ed, we had Pete, we had Lorenzo, we had Danny, then we had Ash as well. But in terms of how many people, so we started with me and 3 sound designers, and at the peak we were about 30 sound designers. That includes Arrival and Sweet Justice. We did work with some vendors because we couldn't expand vertically so much in the last 5 months. It became like a bigger team. So that there was a real rise in terms of how many people worked on the project.
That jump from a handful of people to 30 people for yourself as an audio director, is it any different to handle that many people? Are you thinking about a lot more, or what's your sort of?
I guess I find this transition very hard myself. So I guess we have a lot of processes, such as basic example, we have a stand-up in the morning, and that works when we are 10, maybe 15, but when we are 30, then it will just take forever and nobody remembers what anybody said. So that's just a little example, but we have a lot of processes that as soon as you start growing, then they don't work anymore. You need to revisit everything. And that applies to everything. So in terms of, I mentioned that reviewing, when the team is manageable, I would say up to 10 people, I would review everything. And then mix everything. But then when the team became bigger and we started to have vendors, then that was offloaded to the pillar owners. So they were reviewing team members from our team or from vendors in terms of content reviews or helping them to implement or share the standards that we have to their team. I was still reviewing. And of course, we also have Housemarque creative direction reviewing, but much less content. It would be impossible anyway. So that's, the review process would collapse if I was trying to do everything.
Yeah. That's why you have to rely on sort of your team to sort of pick up some of that, I guess, audio direction in a way. Cool. Great. Fine group here. Maybe we can just get into the Saros. Be cool to have sort of like a explanation of, what the game is, where it comes from. Obviously, Returnal was, a couple you've mentioned that you worked on it. It is the game that Housemarque did before. What's the DNA of Saros? Like, what's the game? What's the story? Where does it come from? Just sort of a high level explanation of that.
Mm-hmm. So I guess Saros is a third-person shooter. There is also a roguelike, which means like a quite difficult game. You're gonna die and go through a cycle of dying and trying again to progress through the game. And so third-person shooter that is in the sci-fi world. And so you have your main character and you progress through the world, and you have a lot of enemies around you that you need to destroy, grow your character attributes, and just go through the game. And I guess one thing that is specific about this game is how hard it is. And in Saros, for people who have played Returnal, in Saros you have more chances of developing your skills and not losing everything when you restart, which I think players appreciated that. I think it was working quite well. But yeah, and it is a spiritual successor to Returnal, meaning that it is quite similar in terms of the third-person perspective, the fact that it is a shooter. It has enemies all around you with a ton of projectiles flying, which is Housemarque's Housemarque signature, I guess. So it's quite similar on that aspect, but overall it is a completely new IP with new characters, a new world. It still is dark sci-fi because it's also part of Housemarque style to be in dark sci-fi. But yeah, it is a new world, essentially. Hopefully I explained that well.
Yeah, I think so. And for folks that are a bit more aware, people listening that are a bit more aware of the, I guess, inner workings of the industry and stuff, Returnal was very much one of the big poster childs for 3D audio as a technology, especially when it came out. It was a bit newer, and it was one of those titles that feel like illustrated well enough that, I guess, not only game audio professionals were able to see the benefits of the technology in the game. Before we dive into the making of everything in the game and dive into that, I feel like it would just be nice to have a quick overview of what is 3D audio, the sort of use that we can expect in a game like this, because we're going to have some follow-ups, and it feels like might as well just make it clear right away.
Yeah, sounds good. So yeah, I'll try to be like as short as I can and clear as well.
Okay.
So yes, yeah, you're right. So Returnal came out as one of the launch titles for PS5, and one of the missions that we had was to showcase haptics, because that was a new feature on the PS5, and 3D audio. It was also a new feature on the PS5. In the fact that it was 3D audio available for any game, not just VR, because on PS4 we had 3D audio, but exclusive to VR, for example. So yeah, so in terms of what 3D audio brings to a game, it brings the perception of sound around you like you would in real life, but in the headphones. And so what it means is, like, if in Returnal or in Saros an enemy is behind you, you should perceive that enemy behind you and then have that cue as to where the sound is coming from, which in a game like this can help a lot in terms of getting better at the game or surviving better at the game. So I could explain how it works, but that could be a bit long. But essentially, we're simulating how the fact that with two channels arriving to your ears, there's a lot of natural phenomena going on. First, with the sound speed and distance. So if the sound is coming from the right, it will arrive to your right ear before the left, and the brain will interpret that as, okay, it is closer to that side, likely the sound will be coming to the left. There's also the fact that the sound from the right coming to your other ear will be more filtered. So, there's a difference, there's a spectral difference on that sound, and the brain again interprets that as being more likely to be heard from this position. I guess another factor is you have the shape of the ear that will discriminate between being in the front of your head or behind your head. But in terms of what that brings to the game is, put simply, it's just you have the ability to perceive the world around you. And what is big with this as well is it's accessible to everybody. You just connect your headphones to your controller, and then you have access to this 3D audio system, as opposed to being in an Atmos room, for example, where you can benefit from that, but then it goes with having an Atmos system in an acoustically treated room, which gets very expensive and very hard to have. So it's a very democratic way of accessing 3D audio, basically, spatial audio.
Yeah, great. Love the explanation.
I just sort of wanted to add on to that as well. I guess all those phenomena that Loïc was talking about how the sound interacts with your head and ears, that's why it's quite important to, when you're playing on PS5 to actually go through, and we have a set of HRTFs, which is what you use to select how that sound interacts for you. Because in an ideal world, everyone would have their own custom recording of their head, essentially, to perfectly mimic that and process it. But with the PS5, we have a sort of template set of, I think, 5. And we've got some really good tools that you can go through that will help you select which one works best for you. And it's, there's no better one or anything like that. It just purely is how your head is shaped and how your ears are shaped, all that kind of thing. So like, for example, the third preset, I think, works perfect for me. So that's the one I use when I'm playing that kind of thing. But I think going through and, setting that really helps maximize the effect of sort of games that enable 3D audio and use it.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting. I almost feel like there's some learning that needs to happen. And I feel like that's why that those HRTF tests are there, is that it's not super apparent to anybody, especially who's not in audio, who listens to these things, what they're listening for. Like it's there's some learning that needs to happen, and it's interesting. Like 3D audio has been around for a little bit of time, but I think it's still relatively new. The way games are implementing it, still sometimes, you hear the weird phasey thing, even though you choose the right HRTF. I feel like Saros does a great job at not having that, which is, it was really a standout for me, in that there was no issues. I didn't notice any kind of phasing. It all felt very immersive. And I'm sure we can get into all this later in terms of like what you're actually choosing to go through audio objects or the main mix and all that kind of stuff. But we're going to put a little bit of a hold on that. I'm going to keep it on a cliffhanger. We'll talk about that later. But I kind of want to open up sort of the sound identity of the game, and this open up to all of you guys, because, you all have a sort of a slice of the pie, so to say, in terms of the sonic experience. I want to kind of talk about like what were the sort of main pillars, and I don't mean sort of weapons, environmental stuff. I mean like pillars as in like certain words or certain genres that you're sort of taking inspiration from for the game. Was there anything that was there any kind of shared language that you guys had? For example, if it's environmental, was there some kind of words to describe what the sound is and what you want to get out of it?
Yeah, I guess from an environment point of view, we kind of had these 3 pillars that we set out from the beginning of what we wanted to aim for, and we would always come back to those. And I'm trying to remember off the top of my head, but the ideas were, the player should be able to close their eyes at any point and know which biome they were in. So each location should have a signature. We wanted it to be stylized and moody, so assisting in the storytelling through sound. So if you enter a certain room and an event happens there, we want to highlight that with sound too. And then also it was about making the player feel tiny on this giant planet. So I guess like, suggesting that there's a lot more beyond the playable area. And I guess those 3 principles were really helpful for, doing a check in each biome to like, are we hitting this every time? And I think that was really helpful for that pillar specifically.
And in that, how did you distinguish these different areas? I mean, I know oftentimes with like kind of like heightened sci-fi, you can almost throw anything at it. And that's great, but also it can sort of, it can create a challenge there, in that like if you're throwing everything at one level and you're also throwing everything at another level, they can kind of sound the same. So did you have certain processes that you were grabbing from to make sure that they sounded different?
I guess it was mainly like picking what was unique about each biome and highlighting that, like really honing in on that. Because you're right. It's a really good question, because there could be so much overlap. But I think we're really fortunate in that the world that Housemarque create is really rich for this stuff. So, for example, the first biome, the sort of mountainous outdoor range, is the lushest that we have. Even though there's dead trees everywhere, there's like foliage, and it's sort of the most beautiful, if you will. So the focus there was highlighting that with the vegetation and things like that, contrasted to the underground layers, where it's more about selling the isolation. So it's big, colossal, seismic activity things, and choosing to focus on that stuff instead. And I think everything else kind of sits into place following that. Like, it's good that there is crossover to a degree, but as long as we're making them feel distinct through just exaggerating what's there already, I think that kind of did it for us.
Yeah.
Did that sort of come naturally to find that balance in tone, or was it something that was, I don't know, a bit more calculated in the sense of Returnal did it that way, we want to do it differently, or different inspirations?
I think it came pretty naturally. I think, let Loïc feel free to weigh in, but I think, I guess one area that felt a bit more difficult was the cathedral, which is where we had we had this big cityscape, and then eventually you go into the cathedral, which is geometrically quite similar. It's a big, really vertical looking city, but the cathedral is entirely interior with lots of liminal spaces. So there it was about, okay, let's push the psychological aspect and sort of get inside Arjun's head a little bit more, the protagonist, and sell the separation through that. But I do think it generally fell into place, like, with what we were given.
Nice.
Yeah, I agree, Banzi, because you asked, but I agree with what you said. It came naturally, but we are lucky, like Banzi said, that Housemarque designed very strong designs of levels with strong identities. So the levels are so different that it gives us a more chance to actually sound quite different across all the levels. So we didn't have much to force. What was not natural and what was work is more getting to the right aesthetic on every single sound, getting to the right amount of detail that we wanted, and the weight as well. And that we wanted to have it everywhere. The amount of sort of the uniqueness of every sound, really, and every biome as well, and also the heaviness everywhere. We should feel like the world feels heavy and detailed too. So that is present everywhere, but the actual elements and how it's actually sounding in every single biome will be unique. And we just use the visuals a lot too, because they're already so different, so unique, that we don't need to force that so much.
Was there other elements? Because you mentioned heaviness, which to me rings true to a lot of the sounds, whether it's the guns, it's the enemies, like just even the footsteps and everything. I feel like there is always this sort of like weight to things.
So actually,
were there other? No, go ahead.
It's interesting you said that, because actually we have some pillars, like audio pillars for the whole game, that is heavy, unique, and detailed, right? So every single sound, right? So every single sound, every single pillar should have these properties. So I can explain what they mean, because they meant something different for each pillar. And so, for example, heaviness means that for every single sound that you have, you should try to make them sound heavy with some low-end elements. Unless sometimes if you have something that's a very tiny object, okay, maybe you're not going to force that in. But in a lot of elements, so you mentioned the Foley, like the footsteps, we will try to emphasize the low end, make sure that weight is represented. And essentially, I'm the person mixing, I'm asking everybody to make full range sounds, and the mix will selectively pick what, the sound that is going on now. It's a bird, and I'm going to try to, have it in the foreground. And because it has low end, top end, and mid range, I can almost like have it solo, taking the whole space. It doesn't feel bad. And if it became in the background, then I can remove these elements. But it's also that's the heavy part. Everything should have low end, should have low fundamentals, so it can feel big and kind of satisfying. And you feel that weight as well. And we also have the haptic side of things. if I try to go a bit fast. So the unique aspect is how the mid-range of every single sound should have something tonal, identifiable, like either the tonality of the sound, something a bit musical, a bit unique to it, or you use some rhythms pattern. So if it's more noise-based, you could have a sort of a rhythm to it, and then you recognize that sound immediately because it has something special. And the detail is more for the top end, where we try to have sort of an ASMR quality to a lot of sounds, where it feels like you could touch that sound.
Yes.
And again, we only show the full scope of everything when you're close to it or when the thing is in focus. It just, for me, gives me the ability to zoom in and out of every single sound, and it could take the whole space in the mix, essentially. So I guess that's a common identifier, I guess, that is used across the game.
Yeah, that's super interesting. It kind of goes against the this idea of, like, you having separate pillars and understanding what frequency content is coming from those. You're almost like destroying that, and you're saying everything is full spectrum, everything is loud, everything is punchy, and then you sort of after the fact kind of
yes, actually
slot
there
things
is
in. Yeah.
Yes, you're right. There is more to that. There is how, even though you execute that, you could still take into consideration the rest of the soundscape. So I take example of the player sounds. And sorry guys, I'm going into mix, like this is like something I do all the time. It's designed in a way, the player sounds, they need to be the same thing, heavy, you feel the player, unique, they should sound like really, really special and detailed with the top end. But I wanted these sounds to be like a mirror, like a, let's say, a sphere through you can really hear the enemies. So they needed to have a mid-range that is, yes, unique, but not full at all, and actually not tonal for the player, or very subtle. So I guess even though we have these attributes, they have varying goals and varying degrees. Also, for example, for the ambience, tonality in ambience is only rarely allowed because we have music all the time. The music is very present, so we don't want to have clashes. We do have tonal layers in the ambience that will only play if music is not playing, things like that. So we have these rules, but they have sub-rules per pillar, right?
Okay.
Yes, I just wanted to mention that because otherwise it feels like, okay, go crazy and then I will deal with it. It is that, but it's not quite that, because they do have within this framework some further instructions that, the mid-range of the player needs to be quite muted in some way. So we really want to hear the enemies through the player abilities, the player firing.
It's interesting because you bring it up and it brings this, I guess, picture that everything is coherent with one another in sort of by design trying to convey the same message, whether it's a sense of danger, empowerment, corruption, everything that the game goes into with its cosmic horror sci-fi vibes. But every element seems to do it with a different approach, even though it's playing within the same, I guess, constraint of rules. So I'm curious, I guess whoever wants to go first, but it feels like weapons, enemies, ambiences, and UI, they all communicate this sense of unease, in the sense that, like, the gun feel powerful, but it also feels like living almost. The creatures, they feel menacing, but they also feel cool. They feel like you can understand them, but at the same time, not really. The UI feels like, I feel every time I would pick, like, through the skill tree, it's like, should I really do this? It feels almost like, yes, I clicked on it, but also like, what have I done at the same time? Which made me like, I guess it's part of the design.
Those menacing UI sounds, yeah.
Yeah. How'd you guys manage to like push for that without everything sounding the same, if that makes sense?
Yeah.
I'll pitch it to Pete first.
Yeah, I mean, I was going to say it's interesting from the UI point of view. You showed made a fantastic palette at the very early stages of the game, and Fabio jumped in as well. But in terms of the skill tree, I think one of the things we've really tried to hone in on was Soltari technology, and it was otherworld technology. So it had to be completely like unique. So when Loïc mentioned a minute ago, like heavy, detailed, unique. That's what we really kind of hone in on, something that felt a little bit uneasy in terms of what you're hearing because you're not used to it. It wasn't a traditional sort of sound, which, I'm glad to hear gave you some sort of unease while you were playing.
Lots of it. Yeah, it feels like it's this whole, like, when you click on something in the UI, especially in the skill tree, but pretty much everywhere, it feels like you're committing to something that you don't know what you are committing to exactly. And it almost felt the same as when you pick up the corruptions and the modifiers across the game. You pick it up and there's a sense of unease that, like, oh, there's a drawback to this. Am I losing something?
Yeah, I guess.
Well, I mean, to be honest, that's exactly what it is. Sorry, mate. That's exactly what it is, because sometimes you pick those artifacts up and things, and they do have negative effects. So, it isn't just a case of, oh, shiny collectible, let's go pick it up. It actually does affect your gameplay. So it's important to translate that those things do have an impact on you. So, it was something we really tried to look into.
Yeah, that's great. It's a great way of communicating gameplay. Honestly, even just like regular menu sounds, I thought were like really driving and super cool. Was there a lot of experimentation in terms of the sort of UI design? Did you push it even further than this, scale it back? What was the sort of the development process of that?
I will have to jump over to Juuso for that one, because he did the system menu. So yeah.
Oh, right. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I guess even before diving into that, I think as a whole, like just the whole aesthetic of the game and like how much leeway, even though Loïc was saying it wasn't just like, go crazy, but it kind of was like the bar was super high, like how far you could kind of push things. And I feel like we have a team that is very, very good at doing like process things. And I think processing gets a bad rep nowadays in the sound design world, but I think we do a lot, especially I can say for myself. I like to have like pretty mundane source and then just process a lot.
Right.
And that, at least from my perspective, really lent itself really well to the otherworldly and kind of alien, super powerful, weighty aesthetic that Saros has. And I guess that's where also the menu sounds came in a way that just wanted them to be cool, first of all, but there is also like that story that we want to tell, and all of the tonal aspects there are kind of like is from the same didgeridoo palette that we've used across the game kind of everywhere, and they're kind of just reminiscent of like Yellow King and kind of some kind of ominous presence constantly. And it sounds a little pretentious saying it now because it's just a blank menu basically, but there was always that kind of balance of like between just something needs to be cool, but you want it to have like some kind of purpose as well. So
yeah.
I think that's where it kind of stemmed from.
Yeah, it definitely serves that purpose. So what you're saying is that all the UI sound comes from the most mundane sound. So you just scratched your head, recorded that, and there's run it through some chains, and there's your UI palette.
Well, thankfully we had the didgeridoo recording, so I didn't have to use like that much mundane stuff. That was actually really cool.
Super
but
cool.
I still processed it quite a lot.
No, that's cool. Go for it.
To go back on that, because if you look at it, the UI also have these properties of heavy, unique with the tonality, and then the details, just the high frequencies. And then if you look at these UI sounds, they have these properties. So I guess for me, I didn't want the UI to just be blip and bloops and very simple. I just like go crazy, see how far we can push that, and try to carry the identity of the game through that. So these pillars, heavy, unique, detailed. But also, you mentioned the didgeridoo, right? That is a critical element used for the most important enemies in the game, like the Eclipse. So that sound is in the UI, is that tonal, bramy sound that you saw. Did based on the didgeridoo recordings that Fabio, Everest, I think Banzi as well did with actually someone in the music team played that didgeridoo, Blake Bennett from the music team. Anyway, but just wanted to say we actually, the identity of the title is reflected through these very abstract sounds. And you mentioned the UI feeling a bit menacing or threatening, and it also comes from the fact that this is the Solitary company system, right? And it's supposed to be that massive corporation, a bit evil corporation. So we want to incorporate that thing. Like even if you did something good, you're still in that system that is never quite is never going to be, I don't know, super joyful or anything. It's still very serious and quite heavy, and but also we use it also like stylistically to do some cool, weird sounds as well.
Right. Yeah, and I think going back to what Juuso was saying, is just the this synthetic kind of processing really works for this kind of game because of all these elements. They're sort of calling for it, so it totally makes sense. And I love the UI. Yeah, I love that kind of that kind of UI that sort of stems from some in-world game thing that's happening. It's not just sort of like now you're in a menu. It feels tied to the narrative of the game. Okay, coming back to the didgeridoo though. So it sounds like there's a lot of didgeridoo in this. I think some of the enemies, you hear them from far away sometimes. You hear like a brrr. Is that didgeridoo?
I think it depends on the enemies.
Okay.
Some of the enemies had like stuff like art processed. Like I think one of the enemy had like a chair being dragged around that we art processed and became something similar to the didgeridoo. But in terms of didgeridoo, when we Juuso created that incredible palette, we tried to replicate something like that on enemies' side, and we ended up using actually throat Mongolian singing. One of the guy actually working on enemies knew how to do that. I don't know why, but it was great. And so he was able to record them, and we are processed using the same plugins we use on other bosses, as Loïc was saying, like low end or distortion and denoising stuff, more or less. And so that more or less was the palette for the cosmic enemies, which are the enemies that you can encounter more or less from the cathedral, for example. Mm-hmm. And so they needed to be like they needed to sound like as a family and connected to the Yellow King. So that's the reason why we ended up using something like that.
Super cool. What kind of processing did you do on the throat singers? Because I wouldn't have identified it. So I'm super curious what you did to those files.
I mean, you can be first. Yeah.
Oh, Juuso's the guy.
If it's specifically for the throat singers, then it's Fabio. But
okay.
But for the didgeridoo stuff, it was, I don't even know how to really, it's just kind of a massive effects chain at the end of the day. And there were basically some few different registers that I was trying to find, like some kind of like screechy stuff, like very harsh overtones that would basically be like just a filter slamming it super hard. So you get like an attack and then a bit of a ring out. And then just trying to find that kind of almost synthetic kind of mid-range filler where I guess didgeridoo sits pretty comfortably. And then beyond that, it was mostly trying to imitate like the voice, the Sarah Daukar, I don't know how to pronounce it, the voice from Dune, like the really processed throat singing thing. And then like the Weld Serpent from God of War. Like those are always the benchmarks. Like if I need to do something big, that's what I have in mind. And basically the processing is just then like bass enhancements and pitching it down and trying to somehow give it a lot of movements,
right.
And not make it like super obvious what it is, but yeah, still keep it like clean and powerful.
Yeah. Well, I feel like you did a good job on that.
I think people maybe can watch some of Juuso's YouTube and they will understand what he means. So Juuso can take anything and transform it into anything. So I guess, his chains are probably quite creative, but there's a lot of a lot of artistry that goes into that, and So yeah, he is not lying when he says there's a lot of processing, and I think explaining it could be tricky. But yeah, it would be interesting to look at these videos where he explains, you take this sound, literally anything, and then you will make something cool out of it.
Well,
You have a YouTube on that?
sorry?
You have a YouTube channel that showcases all of that? Okay, we'll link it in the episode.
Not the processing for like Saros, but
Okay.
like there are
but
previous videos where there's like some examples where do a gunshot from a swoosh or something like that. But just to like not make it too fancy, it is a lot of like just presets, browsing through presets and through plugins and stuff like that. So I don't want to.
It's always nice. I feel to have a look at the sort of behind the scenes, the nitty gritty. That feels like it's a bit tricky to talk on a podcast like this, but it's fun to just see someone work within like their tool set.
Yeah.
I gotta zoom back on something. I feel like we're focusing a lot on the sort of textural, the otherworldly aspect of it, the sort of the nightmarish side of the fantasy of Saros. But there is also this other side that feels like it's very much a power fantasy, the more action and empowered bits that comes from the weapons, I guess, in general would be one of those. Though I would also toss enemies in there because they sound badass and like fun enemies to fight. But I guess Everest and not Lewis because it's confusing, right? Could you walk us through a bit how you approached designing the weapon sounds, keeping them in the context of like it's a cosmic horror, it's scary, it's otherworldly, but it also has to do, I guess, the reverse mission of like this feels fun and empowering to shoot?
Yeah, absolutely. So I guess very similar to what Barnsley was talking about at the beginning, we had a very similar thing where right at the very beginning, we defined sort of 3 pillars based on sort of Loïc's main direction about how, we can make sure each gun is delivering what we want it to do, but also feels part of the same family or feels part of the same world. And one wasn't like feeling crazy more powerful than another. So yeah, they were very similar. So the 3 pillars being, the first one was like no weapons like too small. So every weapon should feel like super big, powerful. The weapons should like empower the player, exactly as you said. Like they should make the player feel like a powerhouse, the soldier that you're playing. Because that was one of the key differences from Returnal. Really, was that Arjun is a soldier. He's an enforcer. He's a heavy bloke going around, and he's not afraid to be loud. Whereas when you're playing as Celine in Returnal, you're much more like refined, dashing about, like a lighter character, I would say. And the third one was that each sort of weapon needed to feel sort of like unique to the sort of Saros universe. Like there had to be something in there that just kind of gave it a bit of unique presence. So that was kind of our starting point, and we referred to them like a lot. So whenever we were doing reviews or anything like that, we'd be like, okay, does this feel powerful enough? No, let's add more weight, that kind of stuff. And then when we were designing stuff, so I think the first weapon we worked on were the assault rifle. So the way we kind of approached it was we had 5 main primary weapons. Each one, excuse me, was like an archetype of itself. So then underneath that, you'd have 3 variations with each like a slightly different sort of like weapon skill or something like that. And then the weapon skill was essentially like an all-fire mode. So the way we worked is we'd work on the sort of base version of that weapon first, because we didn't want to get too sort of like bogged down in like the details of what if we, mildly tweak this? What if this happened to the weapon? What if this? We're like, let's aim to get something perfect or as near as perfect we can get it, and then build on from there. So the assault rifle was the first weapon we worked on, and we went through a lot of iteration for that, because it, at its core, at its like base version, it's one of the Soltari weapons. So it is a sort of human Earth technology weapon. So we did a lot of experimentation about like how we can make it feel unique, but also it still feels grounded and also still feels weighty. I can't remember how many versions we tried, but it was quite a few. But we eventually sort of settled on something that had this really nice sort of very tight low end, because it is quite a fast firing weapon and the fire rate can vary, which was a sort of another challenge we had to face. But we focused on having like a really super tight low end that had weight, but was also easy to control for like Loïc for the mix, especially for like, boss fights. It is very loud. So like, but you still wanted to be able to hear the weapon, but you still wanted to feel satisfying. So yeah, essentially it was just a lot of iteration sort of going through that about how we can process it, how we can design for it. I can dive a little bit into sort of like creatively how I approached them, because I did all the sort of 3 Earth technology weapons. There were the assault rifles, the hand cannons, the shotguns, and then the bow gun was the crossbow weapons, or the sort of more cosmic alien tech. But for the first 3, they kind of had a sort of similar design approach where we kind of wanted them to feel like this Earth weapon. They still had grounded layers, so when you shoot it, you're like, okay, that's a gun, it's an assault rifle, it's a hand cannon. But then we're kind of trying to sort of build on it and sort of twist it and add slightly more unique layers to it to then make it feel a bit more sort of special, unique, and I guess sci-fi, whilst also making sure they had as much weight as possible. I think it was quite interesting working on headphones and then sort of coming into the studio to sort of reference check what I was doing. I'd be doing something on headphones and then I'd play it back in the studio where I had a sub, and I was a bit like, I've overcooked this, I need to bring it back down, which was quite interesting. But yeah, so I guess for those weapons, from a creative perspective, when we sort of approached them, we had to go for a sort of very modular approach because the weapons were so complex, in terms of how they can be adjusted on the fly. Essentially, like, you can pick up a trait that will suddenly, do something crazy to the fire rate or make it change patterns, that kind of stuff. So we had to be able to adapt to that. So even when I was sort of just concepting, I'd have that in mind when I was designing with the layers and how I'd split them out. So for all of the Earth style weapons, shall we say, they all started with some sort of black powder recordings from, I think we had a library that was recorded internally quite a few years ago now, and they had some quite interesting textures in there, and then we used a lot of sort of standard stuff like boom, that kind of thing. They've got some really nice recordings. That was kind of like a nice starting point because it kind of gave us that initial grounding layer, and then from there it was all about kind of carving space and finding out where we can add and embellish. So the low end stuff, I think all of it, I think I designed sort of like a small palette of kicks, and sort of just general like low end hits, that would work across all the weapons. And I think what I found quite quickly with the assault rifle was trying to design something that had a lot of weight but didn't linger too long, so it was still clean and punchy in literally like 60 milliseconds or something, which was quite fun. I say fun. But it was a fun challenge.
Yeah, okay.
But yeah, so it was all about like adding to that and embellishing that. So it's like I called them like these sort of mid-reflect layers, where they were kind of the tail end of sort of gun recordings that I'd sort of make a little bit wider. They were kind of the noisiest thing that I wanted, and I wanted them quite low, so it didn't feel too black powdery, I guess. And then from there, it's like the transients were a mix of actual gunshots that I'd put through the ringer, probably a bit too much saturation. And then from that, I'd add in like some laser elements. Does that work? Like synthesized stuff, or anything like vocoder. Like what would happen if I vocoded this gunshot and layered it with the original? That kind of stuff. But yeah, I think the key to sort of keeping the weight present was just, it was a lot of iteration, to be honest. And we had our system set up in game so we could change what concept we had, within milliseconds. It was just all set up to a giant master switch. And, weapons can be very subjective. So it was really important that when we were playing through the game as a team to get everyone's opinions. Like by that point, I might have listened to a concept for a bit too long and I've lost subjectivity on it. So we present it to the team, everyone can have their opinions, which is really great. We can take that on board, either iterate on it or scrap that concept, start a new one. And by doing that, we kind of ended up with something that had the balance we wanted of like power, not too fatiguing, which was super important because you don't really have a limited supply of ammo. With the Earth weapons, they're the ones that they're limited by having to reload the clip. But I think the technology behind the weapons is that they're 3D printing bullets essentially into the clip, so you can just spray as much as you want.
Cool.
So it's how do we balance that? And so we had a balance of fatigue, weight, and then also like the sort of unique tactile elements that sort of Loïc mentioned before. I just want to follow up on that because you made the joke of like you making that 60 millisecond low end layer, and yeah, it's a pain. It's really hard to get character out of really short sounds. And so I'm just kind of curious, in the process of designing weapons, did you have a sort of aha moment of finding a specific layer that really brought the weapons the character it needed? Was there anything specific that got you there? Not really. I think when it came to the low end stuff, as I said, a lot of it was just synthesized kicks or hits that I'd made, and they were used across all the weapons. I found once I did a bit of processing on them, they just kind of like worked and fit. And then from that point, it was more about sort of embellishing the low end on top of that, so it didn't feel like it was the same hit every single time. So I think each one has its own unique thing, but like the pacing of the low end as well made a huge difference. Like the shotgun has got the longest rhythm to the shot, shall we say, whereas the assault rifle and the hand cannon, they're very fast firing. Well, depending on what variant you get, they can be very fast firing, especially with like the burst pattern for the hand cannon, for example. So they had like sort of very similar shortened, very tight low end. As soon as the low end lingered for too long, it would just eat into anything unique you wanted to do after that, and you wouldn't really hear it. So we just had to be super controlled with that. Whereas with the shotgun, it was a bit more like, how do we pace it? So I tried a few different rhythms about, okay, here we hear like a sort of click, mech movement, low end hit, or do we want like a double low end hit? That kind of stuff, which was quite nice. But yeah, I think the only sort of real shared elements across the weapons were kind of that like low end palette that I made that worked quite well. And the fact that the 3 Earth Tech weapons used some form of black powder recording at some point in them.
Since you've opened the door to all the weapons and you give us a really great overview of that sort of base layer, can you talk a bit about like what is actually happening under the hood with, modifiers and that kind of thing? And how complex does it get?
Yeah, quite complex. Yeah, I feel working with the gameplay designers at Housemarque, they're really, really brilliant. We had quite a nice sort of collaborative process where, we could talk to them and be like, how are you planning on doing this? Oh, great, I could fit that in here. Oh, if we tweak that, then that would work better for you. It was a really great relationship with them. I think it was sort of Pekka and Henry from Housemarque who were working on that. So that was super, super helpful, and that helped contain the complexity a lot. But yeah, so in answer to your question, yes, it was quite complicated, but I think from our perspective, we wanted to simplify it as much as possible, which is kind of why we took the approach of base weapon first, and then how can we embellish it and change it after the fact? Because by having a really good base weapon, we know for a fact when you get this weapon completely vanilla, it's going to sound good, or hopefully it sounds good. So then when we started approaching the sort of like traits and modifiers, that kind of thing, I think the first step we did was to basically just talk through and be like, with Housemarque, and be like, what are you planning? Like, how drastic do we need to be? Like, how drastic are these changes? How flexible do we need to be? And I think what we got from that conversation was quite good. We basically got like a master spreadsheet of how this is going to work, so I could track it internally and be like, okay, great, this does this can combine with this. And I think throughout the development process, how they could combine with each other changed as well. So we also had to be quite flexible with that too. So I guess once we kind of had that, when we set up the weapons, I guess we can kind of split it into sort of the technical implementation and the sort of creative approach. So from a technical perspective, we basically had like a sort of weapon audio component that we made in Unreal, and it basically was our way of communicating with what the gameplay designers were doing without us having to sort of cross over or overlap too much. So it was almost like a sort of connect the dots kind of approach where we could have a custom callback for anything that they were doing essentially, and it just required a little bit of help from the programmers to sort of connect those dots. And then if we needed anything specific that wasn't available in there, it was quite rare. So it basically meant that we could work quite independently and try out a lot of stuff ourselves without having to be like, hey, we kind of need something for this, or this isn't working, that kind of thing. And then from that, it was kind of like a parent-child approach where we had all our logic in one place, and then underneath that, we could override it on specific weapons depending on the trait behavior, because some were crazier than others in the sense of what they would do to the weapon. So that approach really helped us understand the relationship between the base weapon, how it can interact, and how we could override it. And I think when I'm designing for something like, like weapons, it's always in the back of my mind, is how is this going to be implemented? I I'm a firm believer in you should make the concept as best as it possibly can be, but if you get to the point where you've designed something and you can't get it in for technical reasons, it can be a bit frustrating. So it's always something I bear with at the back of my mind anyway. And then from the sort of creative approach, it was kind of, when we did a lot of the trait work, it was, we would bring the sort of the most sort of general version of that weapon into Reaper, for example, and have that as a parent. And then from that point, I would approach each trait individually and be like, okay, great, this trait has now done this. What can we change? I could do like, subtle sort of EQ and that kind of stuff to carve out or simulate carving out sort of frequency bands for me to work in, because we didn't want to sacrifice the base weapon for the traits. So we went full to the wall, so to speak. So it was all about where can we find that space? Where can we create that space for us? So I had like a huge master trait session for each weapon. And underneath that, be like, okay, this trait, what can I do? And I'd be designing something, and it's like, does this work as a loop? Does it work as a sort of transient aligned thing? Do we want to do something completely different? Which is really, really great. So it allowed us to also then simulate what happens. This trait can stack with this trait. How does that work? Oh, okay, that doesn't work at all. Do we want to sacrifice this trait because it's not as obvious and focus on this one because it's bigger? That kind of thing. That was really, really helpful. And then from there, we could sort of just take out all the layers that we rendered and then we chuck them into Wise. And then we had a sort of deep cascading switch system. So we could trial out how they work, how they behave. And then we could work out the most common combinations and be like, okay, if we want to, we'd have to sort of push the states quite a bit. So it would be like, if this state is active because this trait is active and this, then we could also then use EQ to do this and change the volume, or we could chuck in initial delays to give something a bit more space, that kind of thing. Where everything was designed very sort of modular in a sense, it really gave us a lot of flexibility so we could do that. So if we wanted to, we could mute an entire layer, like, oh, this weapon turns it into like this trait turns this weapon into like a laser cannon or something ridiculous. You could just completely remove any of the sort of black powder recordings and then have in these elements that we design on top. So that was kind of like how we approached the traits. And then from the perspective of the weapons kind of having dynamic variance depending on the player sort of key, trying to remember what the correct terminology is, but it's like their resilience and their drive and their I can't remember what the third one is, but it affects like how much health they have, how much energy they have, that kind of stuff. But that also drove the weapon system as well, so it would change the stats and that kind of thing. So we had to be able to adjust to dynamic fire rates, to massive clip sizes. Like the lowest version of the assault rifle I think has 24 bullets in the clip, and then you can, if you enable one of the weapon skills, it already halves that to like 10, or more than halves that to 10. But then it can go all the way up to 50 plus bullets, I believe. So it's like, how do we design elements that can work across all of this? So it was a lot of modular layers that we designed that we were swapping or changing, and it got quite complicated, but I feel like we kept it as simple as we could. I firmly believe that sometimes simple is best. So I didn't want to get into a position later down the line where Loïc was in the mix, for example, and he knew like, hey, what's this layer doing? And I look at it and I'm like, I can't remember what that layer's doing. I really wanted to be able to work it backwards and be like, okay, great, this is doing this. You go to the parent, okay, that's where this is all contained. You got to make it logical, basically. But I feel like it worked quite well. And then Loïc did a lot of magic in the mix as well to make sure it all glued and worked harmoniously together across quite a sort of chaotic combat environment, shall we say. I think me and Fabio always had jokes about who was louder in the game. I think generally the bosses won out and they were the loudest thing in the enemies. Yeah. Fabio's slightly biased. I like to be a bit more neutral.
I was about to ask, because again, if we go on a more macro level, there is always like a floor and a ceiling between what traits do to a gun, how those, I guess, parameters will affect how it feels and how it plays. But there's also in that power fantasy, the sort of, it has to be empowering. We get that Argent is a soldier. It's something that the floor is already pretty high. It has to be powerful. But then you toss in the enemies and the bosses, and in a way, they sort of have to play within, I guess, a certain range of that fantasy as well. If you go in with the, I guess, the assault rifle unmodified, you get to the first boss, your gun feels like a pellet gun kind of thing against the boss. But if it's fully stacked up, like, how do you make sure those bosses remain like a threat sound-wise, like in perceptions?
I guess that goes into mixed territory, yeah. So yeah, the sounds, and I guess, so the sounds themselves, as I explained, they all are, capable of being like celebrated in solo, right? So the weapons have been designed to be massive, and if anything, we scale them down a touch by default because it's a third-person perspective. Not so much. We emphasize a little bit, like we go crazy with the low end. But I guess, yes, so you have this thing where in exploration, every weapon is playing at full range, full volume, because you're not really supposed to fire, but you can. You have unlimited ammo, and if you do, then you will see the full range, your maximum loudness of your weapon. And if you have traits, you hear them the clearest. They are pretty clear. You should hear a clear difference between having this weapon with a trait or not. Basically, we celebrate everything in a mode where there is space. And as soon as you are in combat, and this changes depending how intense the combat is, or if it's a boss, then the player and the weapons, they disappear in the mix. So now the priority is given to the enemies, because first, you are super strong, but the enemies are the threat there. And so two things. First, if the weapons were overwhelming the soundscape, you couldn't hear the enemies, and it would be detrimental for playing the game, understanding what's going on. So we need the weapons to kind of get quieter and give space to the enemies, so you can just hear them. In many shooters, when you fire, that's what you hear, and it will kind of blind you in the audio sense. Like you're not going to hear anything else. And this is usually games where it's first person and also more simulation. You don't have unlimited ammo. But in our game, you are strong, but you really need to hear what's going on around you. So there's like a progressive mixing that's doing based on how many enemies, how intense is the combat, to just remove them and make them quiet. So talking about traits, when you're in combat, they disappear from the mix, and we rely on the fact that subconsciously you've heard them celebrated in exploration. They are here, and then in combat, you don't need to hear this, flying tonal sounds for the lasers. You actually hear the tonality of the enemies. So we just remove that progressively. And when you fight a boss, you're right, the weapon is so quiet. Actually, Housemarque wanted us to make it almost the quietest it could ever be. To just, just perceivable. Yes, because the fatigue of playing a boss fight where you're going to be a 10-minute fight where you're going to hold the trigger with the assault rifle, it's going to be 10 minutes of assault rifle. So, and people were very fatigued of that. It's like, not only it's not useful because you're firing and it's like happening, it's feedback, you need to have that. But also it was fatiguing, so we turn it down over time a lot, to a point where, a lot of reviews with the team, we do this weekly review process. There was a lot of questions of people reporting, I don't hear the guns anymore. And it was a problem, but then we were solving that problem, and people now feeling, it's very fatiguing, can we just get rid of it? From Housemarque, right? And
right.
What we ended up is very, systems that will progressively get rid of the weapons depending on what else is going on, but also intensity of the combat, and also rely on haptics a lot so people notice that the weapon being so quiet is less of a problem when you play with the haptics, because it's playing, you feel the haptics, so we can free the soundscape from these extra sounds of the player weapon because we rely on the haptics. So there's a lot of work going on that aspect, and you're right in terms of how the weapons move instead of presence from foreground to almost background. Depending what's going on.
It's so fascinating.
I love how you're using haptics as like another extra channel.
Yeah, it's like an extension of the low end, which it does such a great job at that. It feels much louder than it actually sounds as a result of the haptics holding that kind of ground. Maybe you can talk a bit about that, priority in haptics, right? Because all these sounds, we're talking about tying them to haptics, but there's also a lot of sounds, and you have one rumble controller. like a rumble controller, like the the N64. I don't know why it's making me think that.
Rumble
Pack, yeah. So like, yeah, how is that managed? I imagine it's a really tight priority list of what is going through the haptics. What was that process like? I think you're muted, Pete.
I mean, yeah, you're not wrong. It's Saros in general. There's a lot going on, and making sure that the controller didn't get overwhelming was an important consideration for us. And yeah, I mean, like audio, the haptics were defined by loudness standards, which is good because I was doing my best to have the controller jump out of players' hands before Loïc would like remind me to rein it in. Yeah, we always wanted to make sure that haptics enhanced the gameplay and never distracted the player. So like Loïc was speaking to there, the audio might be going down, but you're still aware of the weapon firing because the haptics are still there. And yeah, the whole team kind of contributed from the beginning of design as well, from the beginning of conception as well, for everyone just contributing and doing a haptics pass at the very beginning. And yeah, it was something that was very important for us to make sure that it wasn't overwhelming. And again, like there was dedicated mix time at the end to make sure that haptics were under control and doing the correct job they should do. It's just they were never an afterthought.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. And they do a great job at sort of enhancing that. We're talking about this sort of power fantasy. In this game, like the alt fire feels amazingly good. It pokes that part of my brain that just makes me want to do it over and over and over again. So I imagine that's a bit of a cross-disciplinary thing to make it feel that good. I mean, Pete and Everest, I imagine you guys worked a lot at sort of that specific aspect.
I mean, yeah, Everest, as I mentioned a moment ago, all the designers did a haptics pass with their content, and Everest did a fantastic job. Everyone did a fantastic job. I kind of came in the last few months to see where we could push it a little bit further and what more we could do. So in terms of the weapons, one of the things we actually ended up doing, and this was in close collaboration with Everest, was we went back and forth a little bit about how to translate to the player that they were running out of ammo. So as there is so much going on screen, how can we translate that, hey, you've got 3 bullets left, 2 bullets left, 1 bullet left. So yeah, we LTPCs we used to change the frequency of one of the plugins that we were using to use for those ones. So to use those haptics. So you physically feel, as well as hearing what the work that Everest had done, you could feel as well that you were getting low on ammo. So yeah, there was a lot of close work between the two.
Yeah, that was a really good example actually, because I think, especially for the assault rifle, where it's a continuous firing thing, and the where you are in the clip is actually quite important to the sort of gameplay elements. And you don't want to be fighting a boss and realize you only got 3 bullets left, and you're like, oh wait, now I'm dead. Great. So yeah, that was a really good collaboration with that kind of stuff. I think with the one thing we had with the weapons is, I think when we were talking to, as I mentioned, Pekka and Henry from Housemarque earlier, one thing that they said they really wanted was they wanted to feel like the classic sort of ching 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 as you get towards the end of the clip. And then when we sort of experimented and tried it out, it felt like it was sort of fighting against what the weapon was trying to be, which was sort of this really tight, low-end, beefy assault rifle, and having the sort of like mechy sort of I don't know how to describe that word, like transients, I guess, leading up to the thing kind of felt a bit wrong. So having the haptics lift a lot of that really, really helped. And then it allowed me to do sort of more like smooth loop style stuff instead, which kind of make it feel almost as if the weapon's kind of like overheating or just getting a little bit like hot and bothered without having to sort of have another sort of sharper transient on top that would add to the fatigue. But yeah, and I think with the weapon skill stuff, that was quite fun. I think when I was designing that, when I approached each weapon, I wanted to, I guess one thing that I was kind of really thinking of was like when you pull a lever, like a slot machine lever or something, it's like ching, you get that really nice sort of like clunk to it. Every one of the weapons for the weapon skills that I did, I really sort of channeled that and really went for like really sort of sharp double transient approach. It was like choo-choo, or like it's almost on every single one, and then it's just more the kind of like timing and pacing of it to sort of adapt to how light or heavy that weapon should feel. Like the shotgun, for example, is the heaviest one, and that's like a really nice sort of like nice weighty turn, whereas the assault rifle is a little bit lighter, like this sort of muzzle kind of pops open a little bit, and then the hand cannon is obviously like a little bit sort of even smaller still because it's like really sort of tight and compact. And I think the bowcaster or the crossbow was quite fun as well, because that was actually like the crossbow arm sort of going in and spinning a bit. So it really gave me a lot of runway for that kind of stuff. But yeah, they were quite fun things to design.
Yeah, great. Love that. I do want to just I do want to pivot a bit, because we were talking about before about certain kind of I guess I want to say mixed states, into that player fantasy, sort of maybe taking away from the player fantasy with certain mixed states. Specifically, I'm thinking about the Eclipse. A lot changes. I imagine that when that happens, especially visually, and I'm both in mix, and I'm kind of curious with environmental sounds, what is happening behind the hood, under the hood for that?
Yeah, I guess so. This is obviously a huge part of the game. Was like we've got two states for the whole thing, and we needed to consider scope when we were thinking about this, because it could completely inflate the amount of work we needed to do in time. So we were like, okay, well, we can look at global processing, and what if we do this to all of these kind of sounds, and sort of very blanket approaches, but it just quickly becomes fatiguing, and right. You could spend the whole game, half of the game in a way, listening to those sounds, and it didn't feel quite right. And I think Loïc can speak to some smaller touches that we ended up doing with that approach, but I guess we opted ultimately for unique content in each state. So in the environments, we have all these distant creatures, and in the Eclipse state, the art director described it as the air is burning, everything is on fire. And so we wanted to reflect that in the creatures. So they're all screaming in pain. And, that palette is switched out for this horrible, distressed version. And you'll also notice the ground is literally burning up. So we've got these embers that are constantly rising. And that was a great way to sort of tie in this, to sell the heat, I guess, of the atmosphere with these burning sounds. So
were these sounds a sort of additional layer that was added on top of sort of, let's say, the base layer, or was it a complete content swap?
So we, as much as I'd love to completely swap everything out, we couldn't do that. But I played a lot of stuff on top of what was there. So beds remained the same, but new layers came in. Such as those embers, for example. And again, the game design itself, lots of things change in the game during that Eclipse state. So the city that you're in, the sky erupts into a warscape, there's cannons firing, and visually there's lots going on, so we tied into that too. But yeah, I'll let Loïc speak to the sort of mastering side of it as well.
Yeah, I guess, don't have a lot to add. It's just, I guess, at the beginning of this endeavor of doing the Eclipse sound, definitely I knew that we cannot do, the game twice, essentially. It's like every level can have Eclipse or not. And so we tried with processing, and processing kind of as expected in a way. It adds a flavor, but it's not significant enough that you feel the game is different unless you push it so hard that it is obvious, but then it becomes fatiguing or too in your face. So we couldn't really avoid the fact that we needed content. They need the content to be different, and we actually pushed Housemarque to have visual things going on, in the haptics, in the Eclipse, so that we had, I guess, creative possibilities, to have actually new sounds in that soundscapes. We obviously have the big Eclipse, and that takes a lot of space. Is very present, but then we needed to have a bit everywhere to have some sort of sounds that would be unique to the Eclipse, and eventually they did that as well. I mean, that's also what the art director wanted, and they also had the scope issue, but I think that's what made the biggest difference to making the Eclipse feel unique. And I guess, as Banzi said, we couldn't redo everything, but the advantage is that because we work very much split into layers, then, as you said, the beds can be kept, but the beds are usually very neutral. It's like sort of enveloping neutral sound, so it's okay to leave that present doesn't need to be a different one. And then all the more meaningful sounds, such as the creatures that you hear, or the things that you see with the Eclipse, these could be added or replaced. So it's sort of a switches of content and picking what will make a big difference, what will make a meaningful, noticeable difference, and then trying to add these sounds, I guess, to the scope of the game. And the processing itself, yeah, it's happening, but it remains a bit of a cosmetic thing, like it's the reverb that's slightly exaggerated. We have sort of parallel distortion on some sound of the player because it's supposed to be corrupted. But again, at the beginning, I pushed that a bit too much. It was just a bit too aggressive. And then also the problem was it's too repetitive. You hear that sound all the time. It just gets fatiguing. Nothing beats content. Yeah, essentially.
Yeah. On that note, it also feels like there is a lot of sounds in the game. I guess part of the audio, I'm including music in there, that feels like the main purpose is to sort of like pull some emotions out of the players from their hands, I guess, and just feelings as a whole. And I just wanted to see, like, was it intentional? Because we talked about UI before and how it's sort of tied to like the computer, the Soltari tech. Everything is sort of grounded in this very diegetic sort of universe where it feels like even the perfect reloads, they're sort of, obviously, I'm not assuming Arjun hears those the same way we do or feels them exactly the same. There is this sort of like cross-diegetic almost feedback. But is there anything that's sort of extra diegetic or like just added in terms of, I guess, content that's meant to make you feel stuff, but that's not in that universe? Because I felt like when I did the Eclipse, there is such a, like, it's colossal. The shift is like, the game feels harder, even though, like, I know some stuff gets harder, enemies move, like, they seem more aggressive. There's a bunch of things happening. But even just exploring, it just feels like, something bad's going to happen at like every turn. So I'm just wondering, like, is there any non-diegetic elements that add to that? Or is it purely in the fiction, in the world?
I would say that mostly it is in the world, because, we are really considering space and 3D audio and also Dolby Atmos. So we want to populate the space, and there is so much in the world that we want to leverage that. So I guess, and that's kind of the uniqueness of the sounds. Every sound has a slightly tonal, moody, layer to it that will give that vibe, and when it's all together, then it works. And obviously we have the music, right? The music will be on top of the game and playing that role at the strongest. Let's be clear, the music does really that, but all the sounds themselves carry that atmosphere overall. So, in the Eclipse, every single sound will be having that menacing, burning pressure. Every single one of them does that. So when you play through that level, it is there. We don't really need to have an extra layer to add to that, because we already have like hundreds of sounds doing that. It's so densely populated. And then I would say really the music comes in and makes that very clear in terms of atmosphere.
Yeah. Feels like even the music, though, am I wrong for thinking that it's not treated as this purely extra diegetic element? Because the fact that it's spatialized, that is very textural as well, made me like, oftentimes I was confused whether it was part of the music, part of the soundscape. And I was just like, this melds together into like a thing that is very coherent. And then it's hard to tell the individual pieces in a, not in a muddy way, but in a way that is like, it feels like everything fused together. Like,
yeah, that's kind of the direction from us and from Housemarque as well. And I don't want to be speaking for the music team neither, but yeah, I think we do. I think we do have a music team that really wants the music to feel immersive and not feeling like the game is scored on top of the gameplay. They really want to feel like this is part of the atmosphere. And there was a lot of iteration to make exploration feel like the music evolves a bit like an ambience would. And actually, so on our end, we will make space, whether music is present or not, then we will suppress elements or bring them back up. But yeah, I think a lot of that is just the music designers spending a lot of time to get the right atmosphere and aiming for an atmosphere. And I guess one level I really like for that is the second one in the underground, where the music does a lot of mysterious, almost sound effects, but they are not quite sound effects. So it adds a lot to the atmosphere of the world. So you're right. Sometimes you're not sure: is it sound effect? Is it music? So we were definitely doing a lot of work between not crossing that line too much, because you don't want to have a sound that you believe I should probably go there because I heard that, and actually it's the music. You don't want to be distracting for the wrong reasons. So finding that balance was a lot of iteration, essentially.
Yeah. And I mean, to find that balance, I'm assuming, Barnsley, you probably had to work with that considering the music at all times when working the ambiences. Did you have access to the music from early enough?
Yeah. I mean,
Okay.
it was, I guess, not literally, but I worked really closely with one of the music designers, Blake Bennett. And so we would talk back and forth. Like, we tended to, they started Biomes just before me. So it'd be like, they're going in, they know the key, all that kind of stuff. And then I was like, cool, what key are you in? I'm going to try and match drones to that. And, not everything be literal and like Mickey Mouse-ing all of it, but like at least having some sort of crossover in a nice way, because I think it's cool when there is that blurred distinction in a way. Like, as Loïc said, as long as it's not distracting, right? It's like, I think there's something interesting in not knowing exactly what you just described, Daniel. Like, what is this music, or is it a creature that could be lurking here? And I think it was great to be able to work really closely and blur those lines, I guess.
That's super cool. And it's, that's kind of the dream, working in sort of world audio, is to have that communication with music. And oftentimes it doesn't happen, just the nature of when music comes in. And so I'm actually surprised to hear that, music had their pass on certain levels before you did. So I've always thought it was the other way around on most productions. So that's very cool. And I imagine that it opened its sort of doors to certain creative possibilities that wouldn't have happened otherwise. Yeah, cool.
Absolutely. There was a lot of, the music team really didn't want to step too much over the sound effects, because if you had music, loud music in exploration, you couldn't hear Barnsley's work, you couldn't hear the world, and that could also ruin immersion into the world to do that. So I think, Blake spent a lot of time, sometimes he had a version that was maybe too loud and we couldn't really hear the world, so he didn't want that. So he's like, okay, let's try to step back and have something that becomes in and out, and you hear a little bit of each, and there's maybe less full spectrally, so that you can hear, more higher frequencies from the world, and the music can occupy the low mids a bit more. This sort of collaborative work between these two.
Yeah, I'd love to hear that. Time is just flying by, and we have stuff to get through. So I realize we haven't talked about cinematics yet. But from my experience playing the game, it's very seamless going from gameplay to cinematic, both in sort of levels, its general mix, but also the sound quality of things. So I'm kind of curious about what the sort of iterative process was like for cinematics. Was there a lot of iteration, or did a lot of these things come in at the end of production?
Depends. I guess we were in a unique situation where we had like the pre-rendered movies very, very early on, but I guess those are more of a hard transitions, and I guess those are not as, don't even need to be as fluent. But for the in-game stuff, I guess, yeah, I mean, we were kind of trying to be wary of the transitions, and I think kind of that's where the intro and outro stingers help a little bit. There's like a soft kind of just like a sub hit whenever you step into a cinematic. And I think probably the biggest thing though is just having a bunch of like just the in-game world really playing through the cinematics. So we didn't really have to author. Well, I guess the problem was that we wanted to really avoid like breaking from like the 3D audio or the ambisonics of the in-game world when you play in the game, and then you would go to a cinematic and it would snap to like stereo or something. Right. That would be a little bit too offensive. So we're trying, especially like a lot of Foley and in-game actions are on emitters on the characters in the actual world, so they are going through the same 3D processing and reverbs as anything else in-game. So that's already kind of giving us a lot of the cohesion between in-game stuff and cinematics. And beyond that, I think it's just kind of sharing a lot of the same palette across the whole game. Kind of helps it keep it cohesive, I think. I guess one thing where if you want an example where maybe we didn't think about or it wasn't as much of a priority, I guess Foley. That's maybe like something where you can pick up. Like Arjun running in game sounds a little bit different than in cinematics, but I personally think that was like worth a trade-off for sure, and I think it's for like fine.
Which is a common, I think, thing that people do in cinematics because they have that luxury to sort of know the timing of things, and they can really emphasize a character's actions. That totally makes sense. For that Foley, were you working with your sort of in-house Sony Foley team, or yeah?
Yes. So it was a bit of a iterative process, but yeah, we were working with the US Foley team, Blake and Joanna, and yeah, we from the beginning we had like a very specific idea for the Foley that we just kind of like wanted to be again weighty and kind of like almost too stylized and like kind of processed again. And their performances were great to add like that lively, human, organic aspect to it. And I think we initially then like scoped it down a little bit. We were going to basically have them do all of the cinematics, but a lot of them were super simple where Arjun, I don't know, interacts with something, and that would have been a bit of an overkill. But for the scenes where there's multiple characters and there's quite like intricate movements, their performances were great. And then on top of that, we kind of also realized that we want to have some of the more design stuff and kind of basically because the whole game is so clean and stylized, anything that is kind of like film-esque or too like natural kind of sticks out, oddly enough.
Right.
So we did need kind of like an extra layer of like very kind of more tactile sounds basically that we could use as basically like Foley sweeteners.
Okay, so yeah, you were adding this to a lot of like sort of just general Foley. What were these? What was the source of a lot of this sweetener content?
I don't have it handy, but I just have like a handbag, and that has like a little
everyday object.
Yeah, just like it just makes a nice clinking sound. And here I have this Sonorous Objects ultrasonic mic, so I just literally had it right in front of the mic and did like the smallest little movements I could. And then obviously I would stretch it out like 200%, 300% to make it massive and process it and add sub bass and blah, 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 and try and make it as massive as possible. And that became kind of like the clinking for Arjun's armor, for example. So again, a lot of processing in that sense, but in combination with the more natural stuff that we had from the US team, I think we've reached like a really nice middle ground to it. And I guess like having this kind of, this kind of like established palette that we could share amongst the designers was pretty helpful, because then at the end of production, we had 3-4 people doing cinematics at the same time. So I could just basically point them like, okay, we have like a Foley library, use these source sounds for the source, and everybody kind of edited for their own cinematic, and it still kept everything like quite cohesive.
On the note of the sort of seamless nature between the cutscenes and gameplay, I like how like heightening the everyday sort of things, basically the things that we see in the cutscenes are not as grandiose in terms of like scale and like it's not combat. It's not fighting a giant drone that's like 200 feet tall, shooting big orbs. So to match it and just heighten everything, I think it sounds like it's a really, I guess, I don't want to say smart because it's more nuanced than that, but it seems like it's a nice opportunity to do that. And am I crazy for thinking there are haptics in the cutscenes as well? That is like, because it didn't feel like it was the same kind of use from what we see in game. It felt maybe more subtle, more like almost like an emotional like curve. Like, how were they used in the cutscenes? If you don't mind me asking.
Yeah, I think. Well, I don't want to say every cinematic, but a lot of the cinematics did have their own haptics pass. Some of them, the simpler ones, we just used the send. That covered like if our Argent's grabbing something, we don't necessarily need to like manually do it. But yeah, a lot of them did have their own bespoke haptics pass, and that would kind of include even just thinking about the kind of the emotional journey that or whatever is happening in the cinematic. And it could be following kind of like the abstract sound design drones that we could have there, or sometimes there wouldn't even necessarily be any very prominent sounds, but you would still have something through the haptics. And I think that was a cool opportunity to have that kind of like this extra dimension in the haptics where you can kind of try and convey the drama to the player.
Yeah.
There was, if I may, there was one of the opening cinematics where Arjun squeezes the pendant you just picked up, and the Foley sound was quite light, but it was still like we can use haptics to portray emotion here. So let's do it. So yeah, you could feel the squeeze in your hand as well as hear it.
Yeah, I love it. It's the haptics is not an afterthought. It's not just a sort of a layer that gets added to the game after all the sounds are done. It's a vital part of that experience. I want to talk a bit about boss fights. We've talked a bit about enemies, but we haven't really dived into these kind of set pieces that are boss fights. They're very unique moments. And so, Fabio, I just kind of want to pick your brain about, I guess, we can talk about the sounds and sort of like how complex the sort of the movesets are for the boss fights. But I'm also just curious, how was that in relation to an iterative process? I mean, what were like those sort of early iterations on the bosses? What did they look like? Were they a lot less complex, or?
Yeah, mostly. We usually start when the gameplay reaches like, I don't know, L2 or something like that, because in this way we were sure that the size of the boss was done, more or less the attacks, even if they could change, like for example the attack time or something. It wasn't that a drastic change for us. So that was when we started, and in the first iterations we were just like trying to understand the palette, how the boss should have sound, and we focus mostly on the vocalization, which is the most important part, and the attacks sounds, for example. And you had like iterations and back and forth with Loïc, of course. And after that, we also involved like Greg, which is the director of Housemarque. And once we were happy with that, we started finishing the rest, like Foley, of course, which is, I think, it's a big part. I mean, Foley, like movement for the boss, is a big part to make it like very big. It's not like just vocalization, just like how the boss feels, And that more or less was the end of the design, which, of course, like the vocalization attacks were the most important things for us.
Yeah, you're identifying those sort of important sort of aspects of the bosses. And so, you're putting a lot of effort into maybe more detail than you would a normal enemy, I imagine? Or how do you just sort of make it stand out from sort of the more enemy combat?
Good question. Of course, we have like more scope for bosses, so we could like design more details. We could go deeper in iterations. Like, I don't know, maybe one boss we did like 17 iterations, something like that. So it was like a lot of work. But it was great. Like if you like pushing yourself, Loïc, I like when Loïc actually push myself to to reach something even cooler. So we could spend more time in doing that. We had like everything bespoke. Like for example, some enemies might share the same foley palette, and this doesn't happen for example, for bosses or for attacks and vocalization, of course. And also for bosses, we tried something like to evolve the vocalization over phases. Like if they were like getting more anger, or like for example, the third boss. Fortunately, I think it's a spoiler for you. The third boss is just like this gigantic Kraken-like boss. Practically, the first phase, it shows like a face which is not its real face, which will be shown in phase 2. Like for example, in phase 1 is very similar to a sea-like creature. And in phase 2, it shows like a human face, and while in phase 3, like loses any recognizable face, it's very like, I would say, cosmic, more or less. And we try to align this with different vocalization. At the same time, though, we needed to have something cohesive, otherwise it will sound like a different boss every phase. And for this reason, we use something that was introduced by Reed in Returnal. This method of creating bookends, which are like inhale and exhale stuff or gargles before the main part of the vocalization. And like, for example, for this boss, we just use the same bookends and we change the main part of the vocalization for each phase. Just to like the storytelling and such.
Yeah, I love it. It really sounds like a sort of puzzle box that you have to solve because you have all these moving parts, and then the evolution of the boss fight needs to kind of, tell a story. Did you find that you had to sort of pace your content so that maybe the first phase wasn't as intense feeling, or was it always 100%?
We try to be very 100% all the time. But it depends. I mean, I think like... I think we did like 100% all the time. Like it depends also on the boss.
Sorry to interrupt, but basically, so in terms of sound, we want it to be as big as the boss should be. And phase 1 is also the first time you see the boss, so we don't want to underplay that. It needs to be like that big moment. But we just rely on Housemarque. They're gonna make that go intense, So the boss itself will get, will have more attacks, more projectiles, and we don't really need to do extra. We do like change the identity of the boss, as you explained, and the music will also change for each phase. But really, Housemarque gonna intensify the combat, and naturally, the soundscape is gonna feel a lot aggressive and.
Right.
Yes.
Yeah, it's built into the sort of the gameplay. Like the first phase will probably have 500 projectiles, and the last one will have 10,000 or something. Crazy amount.
That sounds like so many things to keep in check. I guess it would be a nice segue to look at sort of mix and just maybe before we go there, we talked at the beginning of the interview about 3D audio, and it feels like boss fights are a nice example of making use of this spatial tech, and also, I guess, understanding the not everything can be spatialized in the 3D audio realm, as in like a 3D audio object, right? Yeah. So in that sense, let's say we use a boss fight as an example. how would you pick and choose which elements of, I guess, everything we'd hear would be sort of sent into the pass-through versus what would be sent as a 3D object?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I mean, good question, and I'm gonna try to make it quite simple. So the way we see the space is really you have that center of the sphere where there is pass-through. You know, everything that is pass-through is kind of not externalized by 3D audio. So Argent
on a surround system, just for our listeners, on a surround system, it would just stay in the 5.1 or 7.1 format and would not use the...
On a surround system, I guess the difference between pass-through content and spatial content, 3D audio content, is harder to tell because pass-through and ambisonics, for example, or objects will all play from all speakers. Right? It's just when you have 3D audio engaged, you have that sort of processing that will affect all the spatial sounds and not the pass-through sounds. But we will have something like the center speaker in surround, and that kind of can create that sort of pass-through. Basically, Argent is pass-through for most of its content. So, you know, the Foley, the weapons, what belongs to him is you, the player. So it's at the central of that sphere. That's Argent. The boss, we do cheat with some layers of the cinematics of the boss that will be, using spatial for sound, because sometimes we need position. So we want to use spatial, but sometimes we use pass-through because it can have a nicer sound that is not filtered. So for cinematics, but once you're in gameplay, if the boss is behind you, you would want to hear that. You know, if the boss is on top of you, same thing. And then in that case, we cannot cheat with pass-through over the headphones because you would just not perceive that at all. You don't know where the boss is, so it's very detrimental to the gameplay. And confusing, I guess. So we have that thing like, what is pass-through? You have UI, the player, things that are central, and everything that is in the world, that it needs to be where it is. And we make selections such as what goes to ambisonics, what goes to objects, and in which order of ambisonics, which is like the degree of spatial resolution you can get. And with this, the higher the order of ambisonics is, so you have fifth order. On PS5, you can do a first, second, fourth, fifth order. It increases number of channels quite a lot, so you need to consider performance. Just to give an example, if you have an EQ, on the stereo channel, that's actually 2 EQs, right? But on an ambisonics channel, it will be fifth order, 36 EQs. Right.
Yeah,
so you need to consider the aspect of performance as well when you use these systems. But essentially for us, it's quite simple. If it's in the world, it will be spatialized. And if it's you, if it's your dialogue or your Foley or your weapons, then it will be in the pass-through space. But as soon as the projectile leaves the weapon, this gets spatialized and the explosion will be spatialized.
So that's quite a few audio objects then. I mean, if we consider how many projectiles there are, and maybe we can get into how projectiles are handled, but I know sending stuff through the audio objects can be really expensive. So what's going on there? Yeah.
Yes, and I guess for that there's so many considerations as to why would you choose objects or ambisonics. And we actually don't use a lot of objects, and the reason for that is more mix control. So because when you have objects, you have essentially a sort of a effects chain that will be applied on every single object, right? You cannot master the sum of these objects together as a mix, but in ambisonics you can. You essentially have a sort of master mix. So everything that is combat related, so we're talking about projectiles, we're talking about enemies, that stuff I actually used objects more in Returnal, but less so in Saros, because I noticed that I couldn't control the fatigue issue, which is a big problem, a big challenge, I guess, in this game. When they are objects, I just cannot limit multi-band control, compress these things as a sum. So it becomes more aggressive. The transients cannot be controlled as much as they need to for the experience to sound smooth and not so aggressive. So we use ambisonics for that. But for all the environment, the ambience, this is where we use some objects, where it's not going to be as dynamic. It doesn't need to be controlled as much, so we can use that extra positional quality for things that, are not going to be part of, combat in general. And
do you have an example of something that would use objects versus something that would be like, I guess the most obvious sound to use objects, most obvious to use ambisonics, just to make a contrast between both?
I guess the most obvious, that would be the ambience bed, something that is supposed to be enveloping. Actually, the distinction between the two, it can be pretty clear because when you have something that is enveloping, you're in the ambisonics. Ambisonics is a sphere, object is a dot. So if you need something to be enveloping, objects are not going to work unless you have a ton of objects playing that sound, right? So that'll be the first thing. We do all of our ambiences leverage ambisonics, but we do have occasional, let's say, animal, that will play as an object from a very distinct position. So that's just an example.
Doing all the ambience in ambisonic, I mean that could be a heavy load. Both, like it can take up a lot of, as you're saying, be really expensive. I guess maybe it can be more expensive in a game that has a lot of separate ambiences. You go into a room, that's a different ambience in the next room. Does this game sort of have like a shared ambience per region? Are there a lot of different ambisonics playing at once, or is it very minimal?
There are lots playing at once. We tried to be smart. There are systems that came in because it got, as you said, it got really expensive. But like the hub, the passage that the player is in, I think that's one of the most dense in terms of the amount of volumes in one space. So like reverb sends and everything really added up quick. So the programmers really helped us out there with limiting and controlling that to make it manageable, really.
I guess it ties into sort of the spatial tech. Is there some kind of thing where it's like if you're in one room, you only load in the ambisonics for the adjacent rooms? Is it like culling in that kind of way, or?
Yeah, it's like it's following the player, I guess. And we did have a priority system, so it's hard not to go deep in the rabbit hole. I will keep it simple. There is an enormous volume across the entire game, and that is a priority of 1, so the lowest priority. And then we would nest things further. So like if you entered an interior, that would have a priority of 2. And then if you went to 3, we wouldn't hear 1 anymore. It's like it's this sort of Russian doll nesting.
Yeah. Well, now I have to ask because we haven't brought it up at all, but like a lot of the levels are sort of generative level design that's happening. How did that affect the sort of spatial tech and sort of the ambiences and what's being authored? Did you have sort of like cells of a level that you authored specifically, or is it completely a sort of more generative approach?
So it kind of works best if you think about it as like tiles. So we had like the first level in the game, and you had it generating tiles, and it would pick a random position, it would offset them slightly, and it would change the order at which they appear. So we would cover the levels as they were contained, and then we had some tech which would essentially look at the connectors between those rooms and see where they would join, and decide whether to draw a portal there or not if it was needed. Essentially, because we'd got this giant volume over it all, that kind of became the fallback for these stitching together. And when there were interiors that would overlap, we would have a portal between them, so it would kind of systemically join up together.
Cool.
We're nearing the end here of the interview, so I gotta jump back to, I guess, an overview of things and just the production side of things. And I was wondering, when it came to sort of like tidying the loop and closing the game and going through like the final passes of mixing, was there any sort of unexpected challenges that came up that you, like anyone in the team, maybe something new that didn't happen on Returnal? Was there anything specific to Saros that was like, oh, we haven't figured that bit out yet?
I guess not really a big surprise because we've been really careful about constantly mixing the game. Regularly we had regular sessions, but there was something that did happen was the fatigue. I think but because we were aiming to make all these sounds to be as powerful as they can be, and it's really good when you have one. The game appeared to be actually a lot more chaotic and brutal than Returnal. First, and combined with the design of the sound being like maximum power, but more especially the level of chaos that can get really high. This brought the issue of fatigue. So I guess it was maybe a few months before the end that in our weekly reviews the team started to bring up, as that they were really fatigued. There's many different areas. You have the boss fights where you can get fatigue because it was loud for very long, so we have systems to handle that fatigue over time. But also in the general combat, because it was incessant, you're like big fight, you have a little bit of time, and then there is another big fight, and you have all weapons on, all enemies on, extremely intense game, right? And our content is also intense, so that was one thing that happened as they were increasing the intensity of the gameplay, that we had maybe more content playing than we imagined. And not so much in terms of performance, but more in terms of that's a lot of transience per second, and it starts to be fatiguing. And that was a really tricky one. So basically had like a new dimension of the mix was like working on a fatigue system, and something that will help make the game easier to listen to for a while, knowing that halfway through the game it gets really intense, but even after the first two levels it already steps up quite a lot, and then you have so much notion of fatigue that appears. That's the one I have in mind. I don't know if maybe other.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it feels like it's a nice sort of step to our final question, which is, I mean, you've heard it before because you were on the Sound Architect podcast before, Loïc. We asked the same final question as a little nod. So we basically ask every one of our guests, so everyone here today, if there's any sort of learning or little snippet of information you would like to carry to your past self when you joined the project, this little bit of knowledge that would have been useful now that you've seen the game to shipping it, basically. Whoever wants to go first.
Free for all.
I'll jump in. I got modular. 100%. Anything I do now, I'm making sure it's modular. It's such a better way. For me, it's a much better way to work. And you can iterate and changes happen in game. You can react quickly. You can, content is there, good to go. It's not a new theory. It's not a new way of looking at things. But for me, that was like the biggest takeaway from Saros.
Love it.
Nice, yeah.
Yes. For me, it was towards the end of production. We worked really closely with Tech Art to use their data to help our data, and it saved us hundreds of hours. And I'm like, I feel like we have very close collaboration with Housemarque. It's like it's not a problem, but it's more like, could we look for crossover that you wouldn't necessarily think about and jump on that?
That's a good one, yeah. You don't want to stay siloed and have to work way harder than you should.
Exactly.
If you have a whole team with you.
Cool. I'll jump in. I think for me, it's just be patient and, trust in the process. I think that's honestly, it's sometimes difficult to, when you're in the weeds of development, kind of lose the perspective and kind of like what the whole game is, what the whole experience is going to be like. And I think it's difficult, but it's very important to remind yourself about that as well.
Yeah, that's a good one. And that's a common one that comes up a lot because, if you're on a project for quite some time, focus on one pillar, let's say, you can really easily lose that perspective that, a player doesn't see at all. So you have to sort of refresh your sort of, creative juice once in a while. Yes, Everest, sorry, I think I cut you off. Go for it.
All good. I think mine kind of leads quite similarly onto that, where it's about not seeing iterations as a bad thing. and seeing them more as like a sort of evolution of growth of what you're doing. Like I think I mentioned earlier with the assault rifle, we're going through a lot of various concepts and iterations, and it's like I remember at the time thinking, oh wow, am I getting it wrong, or is what's not working, what isn't? But actually, looking back on it, it was a really good experience. Like you can really, and especially when I have them all in a rig Reaper session now, I can go through and be like, oh, interesting. So then I went to this and this. You can really reflect on what you did before, which is what's really great. And at the end of the day, it's just about getting something that you're happy with, everyone's happy with, and people can enjoy listening to. Really,
Yeah, it's a great one.
I would say like at during like mid production, more or less, we started using like voice templates and stuff like that. Like practically, we created like empty hierarchy for each level of enemies, like in terms of importance in gameplay or in the mix or bosses and stuff like that. And I think they helped a lot because everything was like every random container, switch container or whatever was already normalized with the right attenuation and stuff like that. And I think like if I had to start like a new project right now, I would just do that like as a first thing because it helped a lot, and you can focus on design rather than creating a bunch of random containers, and you can actually respect standards in a better way, I would say.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know, Loïc, if you have another one than the fatigue. It was already a good one.
Yeah, the fatigue is definitely the one that I guess if I knew this was going to be a problem, I guess if I knew the game could be chaotic to a level where you might not be able to control it from a mixed perspective, then I could have built that earlier, but I had time to do it. But I guess one thing that is not really telling my past self, but more keeping for the future, is how I think we managed to make this game without doing that much overtime overall. It's been really well managed. And so that is something I think that our senior manager at Sushi pushed on us as trying to achieve that. And it was, for me, starting the project, I was like, how are we going to do that? Because Returnal had a lot of overtime, it's not a good thing, obviously. But, it was during COVID, so we did spend a lot of time, and I was a bit scared of trying to do the same thing. When people have been working really hard and it's not a healthy thing to do. Yeah. I was like, oh, can we do that without the overtime? And the answer is yes, you can, but you need to spend a lot of time doing the planning. And I guess Asushi pushed us, forced us to do a lot of planning regularly, and eventually worked out. So that's something I want to keep for the future of trying to achieve these very ambitious projects, but make them sustainable, achievable with the constraints that you have. And don't get me wrong, we worked hard. Some people did some of the time, but nowhere near what Returnal was. So I think that's an important part of the work,
Love to hear this. I feel like it's most frequently the sort of what you're saying there is like an ambition for a future project of like, oh, we're going to be planning better. We're going to sort of do it differently. And then history repeats itself. So it's fun to have this kind of story, this kind of like bookend to the Saros development be like, oh, this is on a positive note. It worked. Yeah. Like not only did we aim for this, but we achieved it.
Yeah,
and the game did not suffer from it or anything.
Yeah, and again, a game is hard. Some people will do overtime, but don't want to claim that we didn't do anything. But yeah, it was manageable, and we hated doing the planning. So I was planning, and then every single person working on the project were doing their own planning. Very often we're doing a new pass. We hated doing it, but I think it's been worth it, to do that. So we could constantly raise the alarm if it was like slightly showing that it's going to be out of scope, and then think Housemarque, hey guys, if we do this, it's cool, but it looks like we just can't do it, essentially. So I think that was that was important. There's something to take away.
Yeah. Well, congrats on that. It's it's not something you hear in the game, but it's so valuable for everybody on the team, I imagine. So that's amazing.
Exactly.
All right. Well, with that, thanks so much for taking a whopping 2 hours. It's still a long time, and it's a lot of stuff to talk about. But yeah, this is a dense one, and I mean that in the best way possible. That was super great. So, yes, thank you so much.
Yeah, Thank you. Nice meeting you all.
And nice meeting you all too. Yeah.
Yeah, cheers.
Nice.
Thanks for having
All
us.
right.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, cheers. Bye-bye.
Looking for more audio-related podcasts to listen to? We're part of the Audio Podcast Alliance, featuring a handpicked selection of the very best podcast about sound. Be sure to hear the latest episodes from our friends in the community at audiopodcast.org.